So the Ottawa Senators have always been one of the more eclectic teams in the NHL Draft, to put it a certain way, and I think that trend somewhat continued this season, but like many other teams in this year's draft, you can see a clear bias towards size and physicality, and we'll see how this strategy works for the Senators. To me, they made one of the biggest reaches in the first round at 7th overall, looking at Carter Yakimchuk. He's one of the oldest first-time eligibles in the entire draft. Yes, he brings a tremendous shot from the point and some good offensive zone skill, but in my viewings of him, I think he's a far less refined player than he was portrayed or that his point production would indicate. Moving the puck and defending in his own end were real issues in the games that I saw of him this year, and I feel like he has a bit of a longer way to go than some of the other defensemen in this draft that went very shortly after he did. I think with his naturally physical style of play, he should be a good fit with what the Ottawa Senators are trying to build here. To me, the big question is going to be, what did they say no to, and is that brand actually going to work as they think it's going to in the NHL in a few years? And to be honest, I had Carter Yakimchuk just outside my first round, and asking around in the NHL, it didn't seem like I was the only person who thought that, so is it possible he turns out to be one of the best defensemen in this year's NHL draft? I can't say it isn't. Ottawa could be a great fit for him for all I know, and it could work out swimmingly. It's just that there were a lot of other players that I would have looked at before Yakimchuk in this round, but I may very well eat my words in a few years. At 39, though, the Ottawa Senators went completely off the board against pretty much everybody's expectations and went for probably the toughest, meanest defenseman in the draft with, in my opinion, very little else to his game in Gabriel Eliasson from HV71 in Sweden. Now, Eliasson is, unlike Carter Yakimchuk, one of the youngest players in this draft class, and that does have its advantages. He's a very lanky 6'6", and his skating isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination, especially for such a big player. The problem for me is that Eliasson, just in my games that I saw this year, didn't bring a whole lot of actual hockey to the game. Really, a lot of what he brought was just, I'm going to punish every single person that comes near me. There were instances where I saw Gabe Eliasson just slash a guy's foot as the guy skated right through him entering the defensive blue line. He would just recklessly continue to cross-check guys along the boards and take penalties in that situation. On one instance, I remember seeing him try to shove an opponent into his bench multiple times over and over and over again while the puck came his way on a 2-on-1 and they got scored on. If that's the type of player you love, Gabe Eliasson's gonna scratch every itch you've got. He is a very physical player. He loves to throw his weight around. All he does is hit. And if the Ottawa Senators think that while he's at the University of Michigan, he can develop something around that to become a more defensive-leaning NHL defenseman, sure, I could see it. He could very well play in the NHL because NHL coaches sometimes just like to put the mean guy in the lineup, which, fair enough. I also am a believer in the idea of fit. And if the Ottawa Senators are building around this type of identity for their team, that's about as good a fit as you can possibly find. We'll see what happens, but I wasn't a huge fan of the first two picks that the Ottawa Senators took off the board this season. The Ottawa Senators then took quite a break and drafted Lucas Ellinas at 104th overall, and I went and watched a bit of Ellinas after he was drafted, and I thought he was fine. I didn't think there was anything super negative about his game. He was a smart, cerebral puck mover. He had a bit of skill to him. He was a bit of a hard-nosed player, so that feeds into a bit of the strategy that they have here. I just wasn't really blown away with him, and he's one of these guys where if he works out, great. I didn't see it coming, but it would be nice. Javon Moore at 112 was, I think, a decent pick. He is an 05 playing on a dominant Minnesota high school team, but his physical dominance at the high school level is a big reason why his team was so good this year. I just focused a lot more on his USHL games this year and wasn't really blown away with it. He was not really the physically dominating player as much that I saw at the high school level, and he is already on the older side of the draft class, so we'll see how that goes, but you do have a long runway with him, and over time he could get quicker and more skilled and apply himself more physically more often and in better scenarios and maybe end up a better player than his draft pick might indicate and be down the lineup for the Ottawa Senators. But the most interesting pick for me for the Ottawa Senators was Blake Montgomery at 117th. I had this guy on my watch list. Later in the year, I started seeing a little bit more of him, and hat tip to Elite Prospects for highlighting him a little bit more towards the end of the year. Big straight line speed guy with a lot of power and a really great shot at the end of it all. He really caught my eye here and there watching guys guys like Tanner Hendricks and Adam Kleber for the Lincoln Stars this year, and I thought he was a really nice pickup for the Ottawa Senators. I wouldn't be surprised if, when all is said and done, he turns out to be the second best player that they drafted when we look back in 10 years, and he very well could be a supplementary, complementary power forward that has a good shot to score with. And at 136th, I was pleasantly surprised to see the Senators take Eric Valenius. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think there's a huge amount of ceiling here with Valenius, but I did watch most of the games that he played in Liga because I found him to be an intriguing prospect. He's pretty tall, he plays pretty heavy, he's got a bit of skill to him as well. The skating needs work, but he is very big and certainly brings some interesting tools to the sport that I think could make him into an interesting prospect with time. Again, you have the advantage of time with players like him in Finland, and you can leave him there for a few years and see how things go. So with Valenius, I'm a fan. I'm surprised he got picked that early, but I'm pleasantly surprised to see him get picked, even though I would think he's a bit of a long shot for big NHL minutes. So for the Ottawa Senators here, I'm giving them a 2F. There is a wide gamut of possibilities here for the Ottawa Senators draft class. I cannot help but think that after all of the months of hockey that I have spent watching all of these players this year, that Carter Yakimchuk at 7 is not at least a little bit of a risk. There are just a lot of holes in his game, there are offensive tools, but this is a great example of a player who, as it is right now, may struggle to produce offense because getting the puck to the offensive zone at higher levels might be a bit of a struggle. Gabriel Eliasson, I have no idea what's going to happen with him, and frankly, he could be a really interesting case study for the next few years. I am not a fan of him as he is now because he just doesn't play my brand of hockey. There just isn't a whole lot there in a lot of areas, but there is almost an overwhelming amount in one specific area, and that is just being a violent, annoying jerk of a hockey player and will just make you bleed for every inch that you get on him. But the problem is that you'll probably get a lot of inches on him, so he's probably going to try to hurt you a lot. So we'll see how that goes over the next little while, but I mean, look, was it a reach? Yes, but guys like him in the NHL do exist, and we'll see how it goes. And the rest of the class, say what you will about guys like Alinas and Valenius, but I look at Moore and Montgomery as potentially decent complementary physical pieces down the lineup that, especially in Montgomery's case, does have some offensive tools that could project pretty well. So all in all, I think if everything goes well, the Senators could have a decent draft class, especially considering the type of team they seem to want to be, and in other situations they may end up with, well, I don't know, not a whole lot, to be perfectly honest, or at least maybe a decent defenseman in Carter Yakimchuk, but I think fans might go, well, what if we had picked one of these other guys that went shortly after? Time will tell, and I'm not saying it's a failure like some people are, but there are a lot of question marks for me with how Ottawa drafted this season. So that's it for the Ottawa Senators draft class this season. You can check our description box for our Fanatics affiliate code, where a small kickback comes to us on anything you buy in the shop, or you can get a subscription to Scouching.ca, where a subscription gets you access to a private Discord server, data tables for both drafted and undrafted prospects around the world, as well as plenty of other stuff you can check out at Scouching.ca. So with that, we tie up the Ottawa Senators, and in the next one we look at the New Jersey Devils.